Hey, welcome to another Striper season update brought to you by West Marine. I've got Andrew Burke here with me this week, and it is the last week of August. The fall run, I would say it's probably getting started pretty good. At least the Albies are in. The Albies came in on the backside of Tropical Storm Henri. Andrew, have you heard any fall run reports?
Well, the big thing that I'm seeing right now is just a ton of peanut bunker everywhere. I went out with On the Water's Anthony DeCicci, the first Albie outing of the season. I struck out, he got two, but every single time we burned the jig through the water, that really fast retrieve, we were effectively parting the seas in terms of bait. A ton of small bait around.
And that seems to be the case up and down the coast. I heard that from the reports on Long Island, reports in Jersey, reports all the way up to North Shore of Massachusetts into Maine. Tons and tons of peanut bunker. And what's very cool, what I always love about the peanuts is that they start out and they're about the size of your thumbnail when you first start seeing them in the late summer like this. By October, by mid-October, those fish will be 3, some of them will be 4 inches long. And right now, that small size, they're perfect for the albies. By the time we get into October, they're big enough that some larger stripers take notice. Right now, the schoolies are having a field day with the peanuts.
Yeah, and the best part about those blitzes is that a lot of them take place really, really tight to shore. So that definitely opens up surf casting opportunities. Small top water plugs, they do the job. Definitely want to maybe step down if you know the peanut bunker are around. You want to throw those small. There was the Rebel jumping minnows, the Zara spooks, smaller plugs like that.
What I was calling for the Cape Cod reports, the general consensus about bigger stripers is that they are holding in some deeper water right now. We had a big heat wave throughout the Northeast this past week. Water temperatures are approaching their peak for the season, and it's going to make the stripers a little bit sluggish in some of the areas where you have that 70-degree plus water, and there seems to be a whole lot of that around the Northeast, even into New England right now. But stripers are going to be in the cooler water. They're going to be in deeper water. Good action for boat guys. If you're fishing from the surf, go out at night. Tend to fish bait this time of year. When the water's hot. Stripers are a little bit more sluggish. They may not chase down, a plug, a swimming plug, or a jig, but they will be more apt to take an eel, a live eel, or a bunker chunk. Just make sure you're using circle hooks, which are required for all bait fishing for striped bass right now. Inline circle hooks. Make sure they're not the offset ones.
We do have a pretty stiff east wind coming in, which could help cool down the water temperatures a little bit, push some of that cooler water from offshore into the inshore areas, and maybe turn on the fishing a little bit on that front.
Yeah, we did a poll on our Instagram page on Facebook because we had a little internal debate in the office between me and Andrew about the productivity of east wind. I always thought that east is least. When the wind is in the east, then the fish bite the least because that's been my experience. I feel like I have a northeast wind. I love it. An east wind, it's just a couple degrees of difference, but it seems like my fishing suffers dramatically. But Andrew, how'd you put it?
You think east brings the least, but I think east brings the feast.
Well, we're going to find out this weekend. So it's we'll have that opportunity Friday night going into Saturday through Sunday. Um, but with the striper fishing hitting a little bit of a lull, we were trying to think of some topics for this week's striper season update. And one of the things I've always loved about striped bass is the various nicknames they have. So with the striper fishing, kind of in that staging period before the fall run, we're getting a little thin on topics as we near the end of this year's striper season update. So we want to talk about striped bass nicknames. This is my idea. I love all the various nicknames striped bass have. And Andrew, what is the most obvious striped bass nickname that there is that everybody uses?
So I'm really excited for this because honestly, the only two that really come to mind for me is rockfish, the southern half of the striper coast, the Virginia, the mid-Atlantic. A lot of guys down there call them rockfish. And up here, northern half, we generally call them stripers. And the only other nickname that comes to mind for me that I've heard is some people. I'm excluded from this, and I'm sure you are excluded from this. I know you have strong feelings about it, but some people call them stripey boys.
Yeah, I think that's heinous to call them that. But go, going back to the original, the first one you said, rockfish. So that nickname, as far as I can tell, came from one of the original scientific names for striped bass, which was raucus. The current scientific name for striped bass is Marone saxatilis, and that goes across the whole species, or a lot of the species of temperate basses, which is the family, the genus that striped bass belong to. So the white perch, close relative of the striper, they are Marone americana. Striped bass are Marone saxatilis. But early on, as people identified species, they would have multiple scientific names before they kind of land on one, and that's going to be the name we know, the scientific name we use for the species from then on. It was Raucus saxatilis for striped bass for a while, and Raucus because the fish hung around rocks, and people called them rockfish, and that still seems to hang on. And I think the dividing line is probably, you probably put it right on the Mason-Dixon line. I feel like from Maryland south is where they still call striped bass rockfish, and from Maryland north, they're stripers. Um, but there's a few other species that have that kind of geographical difference in names. The one of the main ones is bunker, or what I call bunker, and what everybody else from Cape Cod North calls. What do you call them?
See, I'm in the bunker camp actually, but I know predominantly around here, Cape Cod North, a lot of guys are calling them pogies.
Pogies. And what I don't like about pogies is because that's very close to porgies, but they don't call porgies up here. They call them scup.
Now, where do they call porgies? Porgies.
I'd say from New York south. I don't know. Connecticut, I think they call them porgies too. Other nicknames for the striped bass that I've heard are linesider. That's one that they seem to share with snook from Florida. And snook is a fish that has quite a few similarities to striped bass. They're probably the most popular species, inshore species in Florida, I'd guess. At least from some of the anglers I talked to down there, they seem to be the most sought after and popular species for guys fishing from shore and inshore boats. And snook, they're a little bit different from stripers in terms of how they feed. I don't know, their behavior, I'd say, is like a mix between a striper and a largemouth bass. They seem to hang really tight to structure, mangroves, and things like that. And the way they fight, I would call a mix between a striped bass and a bluefish. Like snook are very jumpy, they're very frantic, but they'll also bulldog like a striper will. They're kind of a cool species. But anyhow, that is, you go to Florida, you say a linesider, that's a snook. Up here, a linesider is a striped bass, but that's really not a nickname. You don't go into a shop anymore and be like, where are the linesiders at? That's kind of a nickname that's of times gone by. And another one, my absolute favorite striped bass nickname is squid hounds. I always thought that was a very cool one because striped bass, and we got a firsthand view. I think you were there for one of those days a couple years ago of why they call stripers squid hounds in that blitz in the Cape Cod Canal, June 2019. I think it happened 2 years in a row, but there was one in June 2019. A big school of short fin squid, which are different from the squid you normally catch around here. When guys go jigging for squid off Rhode Island, off Cape Cod, up off the North Shore, it's generally long fin squid. And those are the ones that you get calamari at your local seafood place, fried calamari. It's going to be long fin squid. But there's another species, short fin squid, which tends to hang further offshore. You see them offshore pretty consistently, but in years past, huge schools of these squid, have come inshore to the point that they beach themselves, and stripers go absolutely crazy for them. Andrew, were you there for those big blitz days on the squid?
I haven't been there at the canal when those almost famed blitzes have gone on, but I've been on the beaches for the longfin squid bites on the north wind. Those are unbelievable, and you can almost see where the fish are based on just the squid exploding out of the water. Even if a fish isn't tailing them, they'll still just leap clear out of the water, kind of giving away where they are.
Yeah, around that big, I missed that blitz in the canal. I slept in that day. I'll never forgive myself for it, but I did get a close hand look at the stripers feeding on squid on a day on the boat. I was with Captain Bobby Rice of Real Deal Fishing Charters, and it was actually the same day Chris Megan was out with Patrick Sabile. They were filming an episode of On the Water TV, and stripers had balled up the squid in Cape Cod Bay, and everywhere you looked, you had squid flying out of the water. It's actually what's become our most popular YouTube video. We'll throw a link to this. Adam Eldridge, our producer, filmed the squid coming clear out of the water as the stripers were right behind them, and that was pretty incredible. I've never seen a blitz like that. The stripers just they lost all abandon. Like I would have thought that bunker were the bait fish that made stripers go the craziest until I saw that squid blitz. The nickname Squid Hounds is very well earned by striped bass.
It seems like when squid are around, they have that extra predatory instinct. They're really actively tracking them down and pursuing them pretty aggressively.
Yeah, the squid also don't seem to be very good at getting away from stripers. The reason that squid video is our most popular on YouTube is because there was a TED talk on the Japanese flying squid, which is a squid that's very good at evading predators, and they're able to jump out of the water and kind of skim through the air. They've got bigger fins, like a flying fish has fins, and these squid are able to actually glide through the air for a pretty decent amount of distance to get away from their predators. These squid, as you can see from the jump, they're not getting away from anything doing that. They go about 6 inches out of the water, which is still very cool to see, but it's not getting them away from the stripers. And as we saw that day, usually you would see a squid jump, and then the last thing you'd see after the striper swirled was just a big ink stain and the squid's last attempt to avoid not getting eaten.
You got to imagine from a striper's perspective that a squid is just the perfect thing to eat. Basically, no hard parts. No, it's just something that they can effortlessly eat in one bite, no problem, and they go crazy for them.
Yeah, so some of the other striper nicknames are relating to the size of the fish. Early in the season, everyone's talking about the arrival of the schoolies. So a schoolie striped bass is pretty much any that's I think is under 28 inches. That's how I've always known it, right?
I I agree with you. Anything below 28 is a schoolie, but if I were catching, consistently on a bite of, 24-inch plus fish, I would call them stripers, 24 and above. But anything that's smaller and kind of has that paper thin mouth, that's kind of where I start to use the term schoolie.
See, I always thought schoolie were it was not a keeper. And the reason I always understood that they call them schoolies is they say when they're smaller, the stripers form larger schools. Now, striped bass are schooling fish regardless of size. They're just, when they're really big, there's just less stripers than that, when they reach that size, there's just less stripers of that size in the population, so the schools are bound to be smaller. But when they're smaller, these 18 to 24-inch fish, there's a whole lot of them around, and they form massive schools, and that hence the nickname. You hear schoolie used for a lot of different species. You hear it a lot for bluefin, schoolie bluefin, when people talk about especially the little bluefin have been around this year, the 30-inchers. But yeah, you're right in a way that I've heard more people talk about schoolies as those 20-inch class fish, and they seem less likely to call a 26 to 27-inch fish a schoolie. But I mean, I don't know where the dividing line is. I think anything, it's a schoolie until it's 28 inches, then it's a keeper, or nowadays it's a slot fish. But for large striped bass, the nickname has always been cows. So why do you think that is?
Because they're black and they're white.
Oh, I never thought about that. I mean, they're not splotched though. They don't have like a dairy cow pattern on them.
I mean, if there's a large fish that would be called a cow, I think yeah, I give it to the striped bass. That's just I know down south they call the redfish bull reds or bulls. So
Yeah, I want to know who made that decision. Why do redfish, like a bull, is a much cooler nickname to me. Like you think of a bull, it's going to be hard charging, it's got big horns, it's got a lot of fight in it. And a cow, you think of like just kind of munching on grass. I don't understand why stripers are called cows and then bull redfish got to be called bulls. I don't know who.
I mean, I don't have a ton of experience with truly giant fish, but my understanding is that they grow so long. A striper is probably going to top out around 52 to 54 inches, and then from there, all the additional size, their weight, comes from basically how engorged, how big they are, how fat they are. They kind of seem to have that top length, and then from there, all the additional trophy kind of size is just sheer body mass below them almost. So I think that kind of also warrants the cow reputation because they definitely do lose a little bit of agility when they're that.
Yeah, okay, so it's because they're fatter. They're called cows. I mean, I understand that. I understand that cows are big fat things. So when you catch a large striped bass, it's a cow striped bass. I think it's unfair. I think striped bass I think they're the best game fish. So also, one of my favorite pieces of striped bass artwork is a painting by Chet Renison, and he calls it bull bass.
What would you call them if it was up to you? If you could set the record straight, change history, what would you call them?
I would call them bull bass. I think that sounds incredibly cool. I think that they've earned that nickname. A striped bass is a very bullish fish. It's not a jumper. It dives down deep. It fights. It's the best part of the striped bass fight to me is those big head shakes followed by stalemates. They're not really sprinters, but you have those slow, kind of plodding, unstoppable charging runs with a really big bass. And I think it's like a bull. Also, plow horse. Plow horse isn't as
A plow horse bass.
I don't think that one's going to stick.
I think that's a distant third.
I love the Instagram polls. I also did a poll back when I think when we posted the picture of Chet Renison's painting, Bull Bass. We posted a poll of should we call striped bass bulls instead of cows, and that was voted down by like 80%. Nobody agreed with me.
But here's the other kicker about bull versus cow is there's the whole gender aspect of it. Big striped bass for the most part is going to be female, not male, which is what a bull is a male cow.
I get your point, but I'm sure the same holds true for redfish. Redfish are in a different family. They're in the drum family. But I'm sure in most fish, one of the exceptions being trout, but in most fish, for the most part, it's the females that grow to much larger sizes than the males. I'm not as up on redfish biology as stripers. My best guess is that a big female or a big redfish is going to be a female. I could easily look this up right now. Let me look it up right now. Wow, redfish live a long time.
What's their lifespan?
So I am my 30-second Google search right now pulled up that a study done through LSU, Louisiana State University on redfish. They were sampling redfish in the Gulf of Mexico. And in their study, the oldest female they found was 36 years old and 40 inches. The oldest male was 37 years old and 38 inches. But they said then the next paragraph says the female redfish were significantly larger than males, not because they lived longer, but simply because they grew faster throughout their lives in offshore waters. And that's kind of similar to...
That's similar to striped bass.
Yeah, like the striped bass, the females are the ones that do the migrating, and the males are the ones that they're homebodies. I mean, they think most of the striped bass we see in the Northeast, meaning the ones that come from the Chesapeake, are the female striped bass. Those are the ones that do the migrating. The males tend to hang back in the Chesapeake Bay. That's why they allow a smaller size limit there in the Chesapeake. I forget what it is exactly right now. I think it might be 20 inches, might be 19 inches. But they allow you to keep smaller stripers there in the middle of the summer when the females have left to migrate and feed along the coast. But it sounds like striped bass, sounds like red drum. Females and males, like males grow bigger than male stripers do.
It does give you a good appreciation of how special the striped bass is as a game fish, though. They have effectively what seems like half the lifespan of a redfish, and yet they can grow nearly twice the size.
Yeah, an old striped bass is going to be 20 years old. I think up to 25 they found them, but for redfish to live almost 40 years, that's pretty impressive. I mean, I think they said the largest was 40 inches and 38 years old, and redfish get well above 50 inches. They have a maximum size it's a good deal larger than a striped bass. At least their world record is. The world record redfish is 94 pounds, and that was caught in North Carolina. But I don't know historically what the largest redfish is, because the largest striped bass on historical record is 125 pounds caught in a seine net in North Carolina. But I'm always curious about that one because it's from the late 1800s. So I'm sure they didn't have the Bureau of Weights and Measures out there certifying scales back then. But it's nice to think that at one time there were 125-pound striped bass. There has been a 90-pounder sampled by, I think, the DNR in Maryland.
How recently was that?
Within the past 25 years. I think it might have been in the late 90s. In 1995, Maryland Department of Natural Resources, while netting stripers, doing a sample, caught a 92-pound striped bass, certified 92-pound striped bass. So that's a much more modern record than the 125-pounder. Not to say, but it lends credence to that 125-pound number as being the absolute maximum size for striped bass. But also what helps that is if they're seining it in the Chesapeake Bay, the fish is likely heavy with eggs, so that could add quite a few let's not get into that. It's a 92-pound striped bass. I don't care what's in it. It's pretty amazing.
Big thing. That's a bull.
Probably a cow at that point.
So we've talked about some striper nicknames, but I know this is more of a fiercely contested debate for you, is Bluefish. Now, everyone that I've come across in the Northeast refers to big bluefish as gators. Gator bluefish, gator blues. I know you feel strongly about another nickname for them.
I think they're gorillas. I think a big gorilla, a bluefish is a gorilla. I don't know why. I don't know why I feel strongly about that. Slammers was always what I heard big blue. When I was a kid, if you caught a bluefish over 10 pounds, that was a slammer blue. But then you got a bluefish into like the 12, 15 pounds, and I heard people would call them gorilla blues. Gators, I always thought of gators as like sea trout. They would call speckled sea trout, a big sea trout, as a gator.
See, the similarity between sea trout and bluefish being gators, I think, is then the teeth. I think the teeth have something to do with it.
Yeah, but we could just as easily call our big weak fish up here gators. Weak fish actually get bigger than speckled sea trout, and they're, besides the size of the spots are really the only difference between those two. But we call our big weak fish tide runners, which I think is an incredibly cool nickname.
That is cool.
But that is so. As long as we're on what we call big fish and certain sizes of fish, doormat fluke. At what size does a fluke become a doormat? And I'm going to admit, I used this term fast and loose for many years. Anything, if it was over like 24 inches, I would call it a doormat. And then I got a handwritten letter. Somebody was so offended by the way that we were constantly referring to fish as doormats in the magazine. The guy wrote us a letter and said, you guys are way too liberal with your use of the word doormats. I still have the letter, but the gist of it was no fluke under 10 pounds could possibly be considered a doormat. That is the bare minimum. And if you haven't caught a fluke over 10 pounds, you haven't caught a doormat. And at that time, I hadn't. So I had to go and wipe away all the doormats I thought I'd caught. And until I finally caught my first 10-pound fluke, which was on the Helen H a few years back, that I could finally join the elite club of men who had caught doormat fluke.
I agree with you there. I have not caught a doormat myself, but 10 is just a perfect, nice round number. And when we did that shoot earlier this season on the Nantucket Shoals, seeing those 10-pound fluke and that you could barely wrap your hand around the tail, they become a class of their own.
They do. And it's weird to put a minimum size on those type of nicknames. I mean, there's there's no rule-keeping organization out there that's going to be like, yo, you call that striped bass a cow, and that was only 39.5 pounds. So that was actually not a cow. That was just a nice fish. So it really, I think it's a look. I think a fish has a look. More so than a minimum weight, I think there's a look to a fish earning that nickname. You look at those fish, those big fluke, that looks like a doormat. It's reached a size where it almost looks like a different species from the smaller fluke. Same thing with weak fish. Like when a weak fish hits tide runner size, I don't even know what the minimum size. I've heard people say 28 inches. I've heard people say 7 pounds, 10 pounds. I think 10 pounds that's a really big weak fish. I think they're a tide runner size before they hit 10 pounds. But you look at a weak fish, and once they reach a certain size, they look meaner. They look sharper, and they look like a completely different fish than those little 17 to 20 inch spikes you catch. Once a weak fish hits a certain size, it looks like a completely different predator. That's when it becomes a tide runner. I think it's a look more so than a minimum weight. We're debating over something that has zero consequences and doesn't really matter at all. But it's fun to talk about. I love talking about this type of stuff. And if you hung with us this long through our nonsensical debate about nicknames for striped bass and other species, as it turns out, thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button and check out next week. We're going to be doing one of these striper season updates for the next few weeks, and then I think we're going to take a little break on that. And see you later.